having me today. I'm Kristiana. I'm the chair of a voluntary group called Friends of Tottenhall Recreation Ground and Boundary Playing Fields. We some local residents formed the group in September 2020. Earlier this year, I also tried to work with some of the other Friends groups in Enfield on a Green Spaces manifesto for the local elections to try and get councillors from all parties to say that if they were elected in their ward that they would kind of champion the cause of green spaces. There was some learning there. It wasn't the most successful thing in the world, but you know, we try and we learn and we try again. That's what campaigning is all about. My background's primarily in the voluntary sector, but I recently retrained and I'm now a social worker who works with adults with mental ill health in another London borough. And really importantly for the rest of the story, I'm a mother of 2 young children and a dog, and I've lived in Enfield for about 13 years. So I really struggled with kind of what to say about this because I already said I'm going to have some solutions, but unfortunately I don't really have any solutions for you, so a bit of a spoiler ahead of that. But what I'm just going to talk about is the importance of local green spaces and what they mean. So I'm going to talk about 4 different things and hopefully wrap it up seamlessly, and then we can have some questions. So the first thing I wanted to talk about in terms of green spaces and pollution and climate is the importance of valuing the hard to measure. So here are a few facts about my park. It's the place that allowed me to get a dog because I knew I would have somewhere near my house to walk it every day. It's where my son's nursery was and where he learnt to love nature. It's where we built a bug hotel with our neighbours. It's where my daughter learnt to ride her bike. It's where my kids train for football. It's where I go when I need to feel space around me. So for the purposes of this talk, I'm just going to call those soft ways of tackling pollution. So things that you can't really measure, they're not quantitative, you can't put them in a report, but they're really important to people's mental and physical health, and in terms of having a kind of long-term view on how to tackle pollution. For example, if you want people to participate in active travel, there needs to be somewhere for them to learn to ride a bike. If you want people to care when nature is destroyed, you have to get them to love nature in the first place. So we have to think about green spaces as like a pipeline. So some of the harder facts, which are a bit easier to measure, some more facts about my park. It's within 400 metres of both the A4, A6 and the A10. We're the only publicly available green space in our ward. It's the only Enfield green space that people in our ward can access without needing to cross the A4, A6 or the A10, which is about 4 to 6 lanes of traffic. It's on the same road as 3 schools and a nursery, which serve about 1,200 children. Bowes Ward, which is technically what this ward is in, it's on the border with Upper Edmonton as well, is the densest populated ward in Enfield per residents per square metre. There are no libraries, community centres, straw start centres or leisure centres in our ward. So this is a set of facts that gives you an indication of how built up the area is. Primarily it's residential housing rather than industry, but there is a dairy factory on the same road as well. So quite a lot of lorries coming in and out. So we have a huge number of houses and flats, but very little in the way of social infrastructure or meeting space. So for people living in our area, the park is a hub and it's a real centre of the community, and therefore it kind of needs to be both an investment for tackling pollution in our area, but looking at it from a more holistic approach as well. The third thing I want to talk about is climate justice, and including tackling pollution and access to green spaces as equity and inclusion and human rights issues. So parks are integral to tackling pollution, but they're not all accessible and inclusive spaces, especially with respect to disability. So we can say, let's make parks great and brilliant, and and I would love to do that. But if we're not also talking about making them inclusive and accessible, then we're not doing it right. It's not climate justice if we're only doing it for the people who face the fewest barriers to accessing green spaces, and for people who have probably the best solutions. So a few more facts about my park. It doesn't have any toilets, which I think is a disability inclusive issue personally. It's not fully accessible for people with mobility impairments because it doesn't have a path all the way around it, so you can only access it by a path from 2 of the entrances, and in the winter it's a bit of a bog, so it's just really inaccessible. There's only 2 benches in the entire park, so people who have need to rest more often when they're walking, don't have places that they can do that. And there's no play equipment in the park for children with disabilities or sensory impairments. So there's lots of things that, if we want to get people loving green spaces, if we want to get people kind of invested in tackling pollutions, we need to make our spaces more welcoming for everybody who lives near them. And then the last thing is around kind of what action has there been from Enfield Council to address any of these issues in Tottenhall Recreation Ground in the last few years. I did put last night, I put nothing, and then I came back to it this morning. I was like, that's a bit unfair, so I'm going to put very, very little instead. So we planted about 150 whips in our park over this planting season just gone, and the contractors accidentally mowed them down. We had to save, so we had 12 young trees, so trees that are about, I'm not very good at measurements, but like maybe like 10 foot, put in the park. In the end of the planting season last year, and then during the drought they weren't being watered, so we had to carry buckets of water to save them. And then when we were trying to flag it with the council, which took months, they said that the contractors didn't have keys to our park, so they couldn't get in to water them. So it's been frustrating. And on my bad days, it makes me a little bitter, I'm not going to lie, and I look at parks like Broomfield and Grovelands and Forty Hall and the Enfield Chase Woodland project and First Farm Wetland, and I think, what do we need to do to get on the list of like people that get paid attention to? Like, how do we get our issues further up there? And while I absolutely think, but then on my better days, while I absolutely think that the council need to be held really robustly to account on equitable distribution of funding around green spaces, what I need to remind myself to be really cautious of is falling into a scarcity mindset. And by that I mean this idea that the scarcity mindset telling us that there's this finite piece of pie, and there's only so much of this pie to go around, and what that does is it pits us against each other, and it says we all need to fight for the same piece of pie, and that's playing the game of whoever's in power, because that's what they want us to know. So what we need to do is come together and say, no, this pie needs to be bigger, and you need to give a bit of it to all of us, but you do need to give a bit more to the places which are facing the most disadvantage. So kind of to sum up, the kind of things that, I'll just say one more thing and then I'll sum up. I think what the council really needs to do is look at building pollution solutions from the bottom up rather than the top down. How can we help you to put in place measures in your park that work for you? So top down, not bottom up. And then the other two thing is to value urban spaces in the same way we value heritage spaces, because in every urban space there are hundreds of stories from people who use them, who love them, who need them, and if you don't know those stories, then you aren't representing Enfield's residents. And lastly, voluntary groups across the borough need to agree to champion each other. So we need to make sure that we are calling for equity and investment, but that we're also supporting each other and lifting each other up, so that when each of us succeed, we all succeed, and we all help each other together.